Hi, everyone. It's Larry Johnson, your host for Eight Principles Voices. And I'm delighted to have as my guest today, Scott Blais. Now, Scott does something that I'm really curious to learn more about. I think we all have an elephant story in our past, perhaps, either going to a zoo and looking at one or riding one, or maybe even seeing it in the wild. But that's what Scott gets to do all day long. That's what he is. I call him Mr. Elephant Man. So let's welcome Scott to the show. Hi, Scott.
Hey Larry, how are you?
I'm fine. I'm fine. Now, you know, we could tell stories about elephants. I'm sure you get. But before we get to what you're doing now, which is pretty cool, all right, what first interested you in elephants? Why did they kind of emerge out of all the other things you could have been interested in?
Oh, well, first off, thanks for the opportunity to join you today and chat a little bit about what we do. Yes, we definitely have a niche in the world of where with our careers. It's been an interesting trajectory to get to where we are, but it all started with just an opportunity as a summer job. As a kid, I was always interested in marine mammals, and with the allure of Jacques Cousteau and swimming with marine life. And as a young teenager, was working at a safari park and had an opportunity to help out with the elephant ride area, and that just took off. It's something that resonated with me, and I resonated with them. And it's the short story to a long journey. It turned into starting off experiencing kind of the darker side of captive elephant world, where they're used for entertainment, and realizing the traumas they endure, and took a chance on giving them a different life, and then turned into really morphing the way that people view captive elephants.
All right. So now you're the co-founder or CEO and co-founder of Global Sanctuary for Elephants. Now it says here in the data that I have that you are located in Palm Harbor, Florida, but that's not where we're talking from today, is it?
No, that's my home address is Palm Harbor, but right now we're located in Brazil. So a little history how we got here. We in 1995, it was actually, let's go back to almost 30 years ago now. In 1994, in summer, there was an elephant named Tyke who killed a trainer. She was a circus elephant, killed a trainer in Honolulu. It was all over the news, Dateline, and we had been trying to find a different way to give captive elephants a better life. And through that journey, we're trying to associate with other zoos that wanted to give them a better life, potentially, open up 35 acres to elephants and have them slightly removed from the public and give them a little bit more of their life. We had no idea what would evolve from that. We had no idea how the elephant would adapt to more freedoms, because everything to that point was relatively restricted and confined, and a lot of human dominance. And that summer was kind of the kick in the pants, because we said we can't waste any more time, because we kept hitting roadblock after roadblock of people saying, hey, cool idea, but what's going to happen next? Or how is this going to work? How is it going to succeed? And we didn't have those answers. What we did know is that something needed to transform for captive elephants. And with this incident with Tyke, really dramatic footage all over the news. And that's when we said, let's make it happen. So we took a chance, myself and my co-founder, and we were in Nashville, Tennessee at the time, at the zoo, and we found 100 acres of rural land, about 75 miles southwest of Nashville, and that said, give a chance, maybe we can give 4 or 5 elephants a different life. And as life is what it is, and things come into place that we're supposed to, the day the offer on the land was accepted, somebody from Nashville who was very influential in Nashville said, I want to help elephants. How can I help? She contacted the zoo passed her to us. They helped us get established as a nonprofit organization, and things just started taking off. And the biggest thing that happened during that time is when we gave those first elephants liberty, when we gave those first elephants the autonomy, and they started to show us how the world can change for them. And you see this evolution and this growth and the recovery and transformation that none of our colleagues would have expected. And that's what drove us forward. Eventually, that grew to 2,700 acres, helping 24 elephants from zoos and circuses. And from there, we were getting called to help out internationally, because there's a lot of progressive legislation and a lot of positive motion, a lot of people wanting to do something different for captive animals. And we were asked to help out here in Brazil to develop a sanctuary to support advancing legislation. And that led to the development of our international organization, Global Sanctuary for Elephants. bringing us here to Brazil to help build the foundation and to help the initial years of development for the organization, receiving the first elephants, training the team, getting established, building bureaucratic relationships, political relationships, and community relationships, and helping them stand on their own. And eventually we'll move forward to help other organizations.
So, how much acreage is required to really give an elephant the space that he or she needs?
This is an interesting question that we often get. But the reality is there's no data that says this is what they need. It's not like, a lot of the data that we have when comparing to horses or cows, it's always trying to maximize the number of animals you can have on acreage to maintain profit while sustaining the land. With elephants, it's a different scenario because it's not about the physical sustainability. You can sustain an elephant on less acreage, but it doesn't sustain them psychologically.
Mhm.
What they need to sustain psychologically is incredibly diverse, dynamic space with as much autonomy as possible to explore life on their terms. What does that mean? What I can tell you is in Tennessee, when we started on smaller acreage and we started off with 100 acres, and at that time we thought, wow, amazing, incredible, 100 acres for captive elephants. No one's ever done this before. And then you realize that within 6 months, they're like, hey, cool, this is great. What's next? And they all start looking at the gates and the fence and they start looking next door. And one's like, but this doesn't make sense.
Ooh, there's a big world
So
out there. Let's
there's a
explore.
huge world. But this is what happens. It's the recovery of the psychological stimulation of them. So you have elephants that have been isolated in captivity. Many of, especially in zoos, actually more so than circus, this psychological sterility is pretty substantial and actually stops them from learning how to think. It stops them from learning how to problem solve. And we saw multiple times when zoo elephants came from circus or zoo, they had this unique growth to each individual, but generic growth as a species as they learn what it means to be a migratory, social, very complex individual. Because for the first time in their life, they can actually use that complexity. They can use that nature that they have. You have elephants that have been isolated for years, alone for 40 and 50 years. One elephant was listed as autistic, antisocial, and a killer. And when she was given a chance to show who she really was, and not only to show, but for her to discover who she is, it's astounding to see how this individual transformed into a natural born leader. You and I talked before about mentoring and leadering and what it means to be a guiding spirit in an organization, a guiding spirit for the team members that we have here, but to see that come out of an elephant who had these labels in the past and was never given a chance to be anything different because she never had the space, the autonomy to explore that on her own, was just astounding to see. And this is an elephant who was very social, but then she also self-sacrificed her social desire to adapt to the needs of another elephant. And you see this complexity start to emerge. And some people have said to us, but we don't see this in other parts of captivity. Exactly, because they're not given the autonomy to discover that for themselves. And if they can't discover for themselves, then they can't discover for others, or they can't expose us to what their natural tendencies are.
Let me
So
ask
all
you.
of this leads to go ahead.
You were on 100 acres to begin with, and
Yeah.
how many elements did you eventually support on that acreage?
On that acreage, I think at the most we had was about 4 or 5 elephants.
Okay.
And as we
So,
continue to grow, go ahead.
so then my question is, obviously you had neighbors. You weren't out in the middle of nowhere. I mean, I grew up in Tennessee. It is some of it's rural, but not that rural. Okay. So the question is, how did you contain them? What sort of fencing was required, or what kind of control system was there to keep them where they needed to be?
Yeah, that physical dynamic is always a curiosity. When people come here, they always think, oh, it looks like you're driving into Jurassic Park. The fences are pretty substantial. In Tennessee, we had used pipe and cable fencing. It's about 4 to 5 inch diameter steel pipe. And then you have cable fencing with a solid top rail. Here in Brazil, it's a little bit more substantial. We have 3 horizontal metal rails, all that same diameter. So it's about I'm going to say, speaking in meters, about thinking in meters because I'm in Brazil now. But for our imperial audience, we're looking at about 6 feet tall, 6 to 7 feet tall, depending on male or female. Male fence is a little bit taller with 4 horizontals, and the verticals are about 3 meters apart and driven into the ground about 6 feet.
Well, the reason I say that, I'm just curious. See, I live out west in the Rockies, as you know, and this is a horse and cattle community, and of course, and it's what's known as open range for the cattle. And people from the east, they say, "What's open range?" Well, the open range means that if you're going along a highway and a steer walks in front of you and you collide with it, it's your problem. You have to reimburse
Hmm.
the rancher for the steer, and aside from the damage to your automobile, and they're not real cheap either when you have to replace them. So aside, I mean, what sometimes what they do, especially for horses and some other things, they don't use passive fencing. It will be electrified, and apparently, and
Hmm.
it can be almost invisible, but apparently all it takes is one encounter with that fence, and then that's enough to teach the horse or even the steer, you don't go there, you just don't get up there. Anything, are there any systems other than passive restraint that they use for elephants?
Yeah, I mean, in wild territories in Africa, primarily, they have used beehives in some cases to as a deterrent because the elephants respond to the sound of the buzzing of the bees and they keep their distance. Elephants, I mean, they have used electric fencing. The beautiful thing about electric fencing and elephants is they're smarter than we are, and they figure it out. You know,
We,
we
we
have
know
been
how to
humbled for
beat it,
years.
Scott. We know how to beat it.
You talk about elephant stories. We could go on and on about how elephants have outsmarted us through the years, with certainty. You know, they're just far more intelligent than we can imagine, and far more intelligent than we actually give them credit for. And regarding electric fences, a couple of factors. One, if they have elephants that have tusks, those tusks are naturally insulated, so they can actually use their tusk and gently dismantle the fence. They will topple
I
trees
hadn't
to
even thought
ground
of
it
that.
out.
I hadn't even thought, but
Yeah,
it's,
and yeah,
yeah.
it's fascinating. I mean, and they just figured out, and they're highly analytical. You know, they are problem solvers by nature. They're survivors, and if they want to go to a different side of the fence, they'll figure out a way. So we don't have the free range capacity even here in Brazil. We're in the middle of nowhere. Our neighbors' cows come visit us, but it's different than having our elephants go visit our neighbors. I think would be a different scenario. So we have to make sure we are protecting our neighbors and protecting ourselves and protecting the elephants from what they could encounter. So substantial fences. It's actually the part that cost us the most is building an appropriate fence. But that fence is what gives them the space to explore and the autonomy that allows all the recovery and transformation that occurs.
Now, so are you doing, are you just providing sanctuary? Are you doing research? Are you doing both? I mean, and then once you answer that question, how are you invited in, or do you just identify places that you want to set up shop? How does that work?
Sure. So ultimately, what we are here to do is give these elephants the best life possible for as long as possible. You know, we are from the moment we encounter an elephant, we are there by their side until the end of their days. Sometimes that's us helping them through consultation, an elephant that can't come here possibly, or an elephant in another country, and sometimes it is actually through rescuing and bringing them here to the sanctuary. And we do some research. A lot of the research that we do is more of, you know, the impact of the elephant on the environment. We do long-term analysis of the recovery of the elephants and still collecting that data as time goes on to show what happens when you give elephants more space. A simple example of that long-term research, the last two elephants that came from a zoo in Mendoza, Argentina. They were literally in a concrete pit. They had a concrete pit about 400 square meters, and one of the elephants, the one that remains, was born into a concrete pit. Prior to coming here, she didn't know anything other than concrete. Watching that transformation over 6 weeks, 6 months, and hopefully 6 years or 16 years. She's relatively young. She's 23 years old, 24 years old now. Most of the elephants that come here in South America are over 50. So she hopefully has a long life to live here, but it's going to be amazing to see that transformation and how she adapts not only to the physical environment, but to changing social structures. Um, and it's just amazing to see, you know, her mom passed away after about 5 months here, and watch how she instinctually responded to her mom passing and inviting her friends over to pay homage to her mom's life and really be there with her and mourning the loss of her mother was just astounding to see with an elephant that never experienced any of this in life. She didn't have anybody that showed her what to do when an elephant passes. And is that instinctual knowledge? Is that knowledge that comes from other individuals that she's living with now? But this is all that long-term data collection, so we can try to put these pieces together. What happens to an elephant's mind when they come into a sanctuary setting? What we
So
know from science.
so when this young when this elephant was born onto a concrete pad. How do they live on a concrete pad? I mean, there's no greenery, there's no dirt. I mean, how does that work?
This was concrete floor, concrete walls, concrete little dungeon of a barn. And the barn was literally underground, and half of it was underground. And it was, I mean, it was a very dark, very dank, very isolated environment.
Ew, sounds dreadful.
One of the, it's horrific. I've seen so many things in my life with captive elephants. I've seen extreme beatings, I've seen videos, I've seen elephants from all over the world, and these may have been the most physically compromised elephants I've ever seen because of that isolation. And I can't imagine what it was like, one with an infant growing up in there, but also a mom trying to raise her infant in that life. And you saw some dysfunctional behavior between them that wouldn't be typical. The young one is actually aggressive to her mom. This is atypical in elephant society. But her mom was trying to give her daughter, seemingly trying to give her daughter everything she could. And if that means, being the recipient of aggression makes her daughter feel better, I'll do that. I'll do anything to make my daughter feel better. So this is part of her transformation of learning proper social interaction. But yeah, this elephant came from concrete world, concrete dungeon, and never seen the horizon. She never could look in front of her and see the horizon until we opened up the door that allowed us to put the transport crate. That's the first time she could actually look directly in front of her and not see concrete. So imagine an elephant as, an animal as intelligent and dynamic as an elephant, one of the most intelligent in the world, and all she had for visual stimulation was looking up in the sky or counting rocks in the wall. And it's how they survive, how they cope is beyond us. How
You,
they come out of those environments is astounding. The stability that they actually have,
you
considering
mentioned
the isolation.
you mentioned age. What's the typical lifespan of an elephant?
Yeah, so normally in the wild, they can live up to 70 years old with African and Asian elephants, sometimes older. In captivity, tragically, many times it's less than half,
Uh,
35 to 40 years.
and you mentioned something to me. I always thought there were sort of two general classes of elephants: the African elephants, and the Indian elephants, which are smaller.
Mhm.
Is that generally the
Right.
two divisions that you're looking at?
Yeah, they're actually for our management, we divide them into those two groups, but there's actually three different species. There's two different species of African elephants, an African forest elephant and an African savanna elephant. For many, many years, they were considered one species, but they are actually two different species. And then there are Asian elephants. And within the Asian elephants, there's several different subgroups of different types of Asian elephants, different body conformations. There's, Indian elephants are going to be different than Sri Lankan elephants, going to be different than Cambodia elephants. They all are Asian elephants. However, they do have some physical characteristics that are different.
All right. Well, this is fascinating. All right. So that you're currently in Brazil. What are you doing there?
So right now, if we are here helping to develop Elephant Sanctuary Brazil, we were asked to come here. Actually, we moved here about 10 years ago to help develop a sanctuary here to support advancing legislation. Many times we see legislation advancing without a proper alternative or solution. And what started happening here is elephants were being removed from the circus because they felt this was not appropriate life for elephants, which is not, but then they didn't have a solution for them. Many of them were put into zoos because where else do you put an elephant?
Yeah.
But
Well,
these zoos weren't prepared. They didn't know what to do. They didn't have proper spacing. They didn't have proper training. Most of the elephants that come here, they have, in their history file, they have 2 medical exams and they've been there for 10 years. They're not getting proper foot care. Elephants are arriving with severe osteomyelitis, a lot of them surviving with joint issues, digestive issues because of the tragedy of captivity, because of isolation, because of the improper diet, improper physical stimulation. So we're here to build that alternative and be able to support that legislation that is trying to give these elephants a better life. The first 2 elephants that came here, because of the legislation, they were removed from the circus. There wasn't a place to go, so they got put back on chains at a farm that was owned by the lawyer for the circus. And they were stuck on a 3-meter chain, 9 feet chain for 6 years before we were able to pay, before we came into existence and we were able to take them. So advancing legislation is brilliant, but we need to think about the whole picture. So fortunately, some of the teams that were working on the legislation was thinking far enough ahead asked us to get involved and see, hey, can you help us build a sanctuary? And that's, you talked about a unique niche in life. Unfortunately, there are not many people that have done this. And we have, as we say, the skill and just enough crazy to move to Brazil to start a sanctuary. And fortunately, we have a lot of tremendous support, and the community has been astounding, and the government has been astounding. And we've been able to help 9 elephants to date. And right now, we're waiting for importation permits for 3 more coming from Argentina, from 2 zoos, which is another beautiful element of the transition that's happening. And these 2 zoos in Argentina actually realize the negative impact that this captive spaces are having on many of these larger mammals. And they have gone through tremendous effort to actually transform their zoo model to helping indigenous species and focusing on rehabilitation and release and reproductive programs for endangered indigenous species, and using that as their educational tool to help people become aware of the natural world, and then moving most of their exotics that they can't properly provide for in these small spaces
So,
to internationally recognized sanctuaries.
so you have this project in in Brazil. Are there any other? Are you working on any other projects concurrently, or so you do it one at a time, or how does that work?
Yeah, so you asked earlier in one of your previous questions, how do you get involved? And, how do you understand about this? And this is a small world. This is the world of captive elephants is pretty tiny. I have a longstanding reputation working with captive elephants, being one of the co-founders of one of the first open, natural space, natural habitat sanctuaries. And now I work in Brazil. A lot of people know who we are and know what we stand for. And so we get a lot of contacts from people either wanting to start a sanctuary or in the process of it. There are a couple projects that we're working on, nothing that is public right now. A lot of what we do is behind the scenes, just trying to help out and lend as advice. We're working on facility design for one organization right now, but all that's a little bit under the radar. We're definitely not an organization that wants to, be at the front end. We want to lend our experience, and what we're doing here in Brazil, our organization is Global Sanctuary for Elephants, but we are helping a Brazilian entity because we want them to be self-sustainable. This is not, yes, we'll be here for the long term to be able to help wherever we want, but we want them to actually have their own legs. We want this to have their own identity. And then we can go off to help other organizations. They can still rely on us. Right now, Elephant Sanctuary Brazil still receives about 80 to 90% of its funding through Global Sanctuary for Elephants. As time, that will hopefully change, but we want to help entities become their own.
So let's talk about the funding equation here. You're a C3. Are obviously very passionate about what you do. So part of your job, I'm sure, has to be share what you do to potential investors, people who would support you. Um, Give me just a sort of a rough breakdown where the revenue comes from, individuals, any kind of host or government subsidy. I mean, sort of what's the general makeup?
Sure. Right now, we don't get any government subsidy for Global Sanctuary for Elephants. We get a very small amount of subsidy for the work here in Brazil through the Brazilian nonprofit organization. Uh, and as far as private donations, about 90% of our funding comes from private donations, and 10% is from corporations or foundations. So right now, it's very much private funds support us. The vast majority of our funds from smaller level donors, 5,000 or less. We are just tremendously gifted to have a group of supporters that we have been able to rely on and have, they just, I'm always at a loss for words how to describe them because we're just humbled to no end, but the support that we've been able to gain for this project.
Well, that's pretty remarkable, Scott. You've got 90% of your revenue from individuals, and you have a little bit here and a little bit there, but that gives you a lot of flexibility, does it not?
One thing early on in the development of Elephant Sanctuary in Tennessee, we were in the dream world. We need a one big donor to help support us, and would be brilliant. It would make fundraising a lot easier. However, what we came to realize later on, and one of our mentors early on said, you need a lot of people, each doing their part,
Yeah.
and all those folks coming together allows you long-term stability that a single donor can't give. And they were right. And that's what we focused on here as well in Brazil. When we have times of economic recession, the sanctuary in Tennessee actually saw increased growth. And that has to do with having a large, broad family of supports, because you're going to have people that are going to ebb and flow through their capacity to give in life. And just having that broad-based support gives us the stability to, as you said, do what we need to do, when we need to, how we need to. And right now we have the ability, if we had to rescue an elephant tomorrow, we could put it out an appeal, and we know we could have the funds within 24 hours to do that. Those rescues are the easy part. The challenging part is the development. You know, a lot of
That's
people
not
don't want to give to a fence.
that's not nearly as sexy, Scott. That's not nearly as sexy.
It's not nearly as appealing. No, definitely not.
They want to do that. Well, this is remarkable that you have tapped into these. You've made yourself aware in the right areas, the people that have this interest, and you understand that it takes both large and small gifts, a variety of people. You're building that community. You're building that network. Where would you like to go? Do you want to clone yourself? You want to grow the organization? What would you like? No, you're obviously doing very well. You're very accomplished at what you do. You have a success record. So where from now?
There's two different elements of this. Let's talk about the organizational development first. We want Global Sanctuary for Elephants to be in a place that in the future, hopefully in the near future, if somebody comes to us and says, hey, here's the scenario, here's this population of elephants that needs help, here's the idea, we want to develop an elephant sanctuary, we need guidance, and we want to be able to capacity not only to provide the guidance, but also provide the initial funding. This is something we had talked about several years ago. If there was somebody that could have given Global Sanctuary for Elephants $1 million startup fund, it can be a 5-year interest-free loan. And there are organizations, there are entities out there that can do this with no harm. We know of nonprofit organizations that have $50 or $60 million liquid assets. $1 million out of that, as an interest-free loan, not only does that help that organization profile their extensive work, but it would have allowed us to receive elephants before it was too late. Mm-hmm. We could have bought the property, built the fencing sooner, expedited every aspect of our development, and given some of those elephants that couldn't make it because they passed away too soon, maybe we could have given them 2 or 3 years mm-hmm. of autonomy and life. Yeah. And instead we had during that early struggle. So we want to be able to help be an organization that helps expedite this development to have the most positive impact for captive elephants that we can. That's going to come through long-term larger supporters. We will get there. We are still infant in our organization, but we are growing leaps and bounds. The next element of that is how to transfer our knowledge. We have been given a unique pathway through this life, and we've been opened to insurmountable lessons from elephants, simply from letting them be our guide. No one knew what elephants would do when you gave them space, and we let them show us what they needed, and we continue to adapt to that progress. Now we want to share with the next generation of elephant sanctuary operations how to do this and what it means to listen to them, what it means to see them, what it means to understand their struggle, what it means to be malleable to their needs. And that's much more complex than the financial side. It's much more nuanced. You're dealing with one of the most highly complex social individuals in the world that communicate on a completely different plane than we do. And we need to understand their struggle. On top of that, their complexity, you add the trauma and the complexity of trauma and the complexity of recovery that we all know is different with each individual. And this is the most dynamic situation that we have to deal with. And passing that knowledge on is something that we invest time to every day, because it is a long learning curve. That information doesn't come quickly. And I've been working with elephants for 35 years now. And I would say about 6 years ago, we had an elephant that came, and she continue to teach me things that I just never saw before. And I think the more you learn, the more you're open to what we haven't learned yet. And the more you realize how much we have to grow. And they're going to be mentors. They're going to be teachers for us. And we just need to keep learning, but also pass that on to the next.
So then you are not looking to expand this concept beyond the elephant. The elephants, that is your shtick.
Sure, absolutely. Again, we've been given a unique pathway through this life. We've been in really unique opportunities that we've been fortunate enough to take advantage of, to have the support, to have the family support, to have the comfort to be able to just take those strides forward and take a chance on making a positive difference. And that has taken us on this journey that has just been astounding. Um, and elephants are that's where we can thrive. That's where we can best make our difference. We've been asked to take other animals. We do help here in Brazil. We do have a indigenous wildlife program where we do final stage recovery and release. That's pretty straightforward. Not dealing with years of trauma and that complexity that comes with that recovery. We were recently asked over the last couple of years to take 15 giraffe. We said that's a little too much. That's not in our wheelhouse. That's a different property. That's a different fence. That's a different psychology. That's a different everything. We can't do that. That's spreading yourself too thin. And one of the things that we have always stayed true for is this is where we can make a positive impact. If we start trying to spread ourselves too thin, we're going to lose out on giving these elephants what they actually need.
Well, then you have really then you've decided that this is where your interest is going to be, where you're going to be, and so that you also understand that you can't be all things to all people.
Absolutely.
So you're going to be focusing on where you can have the greatest impact on others. You've learned a lot. I get the impression you're eager to learn more because they'll teach you, I presume, the elephants that is. And so you're a pretty young guy. I see you doing this for what, several more years, or you have something else up your sleeve, or what?
My body says 50 going on 80. My mind is still a few years behind that. So,
Yeah.
we don't know. We're Larry, if you had to say, what are you going to do with your life? When I was 22 years old, it definitely would not have taken me here. And I don't know where it's going to go from this point forward. How this is going to unfold, we're just open to the process and open to being where we need to be to continue to have the best impact that we can have. Sometimes that's a voice behind the scenes, and sometimes that's being like we are in Brazil, having more front end and more direct impact. Um, we're trying not to look too far further ahead since we get too far in front of ourselves. I think it goes back to recognizing our limitations. One thing that we've been good at is knowing when we have to slow down and say no. And that sometimes with indigenous species, for example, sometimes we're asked to take more than we can do, and we would love to say yes all the time, but sometimes saying no actually gives them all a better chance. So knowing your limitations, knowing capacity, knowing that we're all learning and still have so much to understand in the world are all things that the elephants helped us to understand. Um, and the lessons from elephants go on and on there. We could talk for years about those lessons and the journey they've taken us on, lessons of humility, um, and you'll go a long way. And I think that goes along to what you said about there's more to learn, and there's always more to learn.
I really like the way you've constructed this. You know what your limitations are. You're not in the what I call save the world mode where everything you just keep enlarging, enlarging. It's because ultimately you want to have success and success with impact. You're not just looking for, you're not acting out of unbridled compassion. That's what I'm trying to say. You're very focused about what you do. You know what gives success. You know what your capabilities are, and you're focused on that. That says a lot for your organization. It
Thank you.
really does. Um, is there anything that we haven't covered that you'd like to tell us? I'm sure you could talk all afternoon, but is there anything you think
There's
we
a
have?
lot to share. No,
Oh,
Larry, I appreciate so much those. Go ahead.
I would say, well, go ahead. No, you go ahead first. You said you
Your
appreciate.
word saying your compliment it means the world to us. Early on, we have somebody described us as the realistic dreamers. It's the big vision. Yes, we want to change the world, but we need to be realistic in what we can do.
Yeah.
And but we're also not afraid to take that step forward. And I think if there's one thing that we can have said in the past and will continue to say to others that want to make a positive difference,
Yes.
don't be afraid of failure. Take a chance on success. It's very easy to hold ourselves back from having the positive difference that we can actually make in the world,
Oh yeah.
whether that be a positive difference for your family, your community, for yourself, but just take a chance on it being successful. Because when you do that, when you believe in the potential, the positive potential, the world opens up before you in unimaginable ways. Looking at our trajectory from potentially helping 4 elephants to here we are working internationally, having rescued many dozens of elephants throughout the world, and it's just amazing what can happen when we take those steps forward.
Okay, that is remarkable. Thank you. If someone wanted to get in contact with you, how best would they do that?
The easiest way to follow us is through our website, which is globalelephants.org. And from the website, you can have links to all social media platforms. We have blog posts and Facebook posts daily, where you can follow us, follow our progression, follow the lessons that the elephants are teaching us. We are incredibly transparent. You're going to learn all the ups and downs of what it means to be in a sanctuary. A lot of times people have this, the pie in the sky, the rainbows and butterflies, and view of what sanctuary life is. But the reality is often a lot different. It's a struggle. It's a hardship. It's the ebbs and flows through for those elephants as well. And it's actually unfair to them to paint this in the picture of roses and butterflies. Yes, it's an astounding life, but because of the trauma they've endured, it's actually expected for them to have the highs and lows. And we want people to see those lows also. And one thing that happens, one of the things that we feel passionately about is all of you, our supporters and followers, this is your life also. We get to be here on the ground floor, but we want you to feel like you are intimately involved with the organization and intimately involved with this recovery of their lives. It's how we can honor them more than just giving them the space. Honor that journey to understand what we can all do to make better choices, to not have the negative impact that these elephants have had, and continue to try to improve our world.
Okay, well, you can't get any better than that, Scott. You've got your head on straight. You know what you want to do. You know you can't do everything, so you're doing what you can do. I mean, what else is there to say? Thank you. Thank you.
Larry, thank you
Everybody,
so much for this opportunity.
well, you're more than welcome. My pleasure. Everybody, we've been talking to Scott Blais, who is Elephant. I can't remember the name of the organization here. It's Global Sanctuary for Elephants. And, that name is a little misnomer, Scott. And I tell you why, because when the people hear the word global, oh, he's one of those save the world types. And so that kind of, but you're not. You see, you are global, but you're sharp and you're focused. And there's the difference. So I want to thank you again. Everyone, we've been doing that for, I guess, the last 35 or 40 minutes. He told you how to reach him. I'm sure he wouldn't mind support if you're interested. But until then, I guess it's next week. There'll be another guest, and we'll find out what they're up to. Thanks for spending your time with us today.
Larry, thank you so much.